In this video, we're going to examine what happened when Lucy Letby was interviewed by police in relation to child E. At the very beginning of this interview, they note that the first interview took place on the 4th of July 2018. So this is Lucy's second interview in relation to child E. Now, I've covered this infant very recently, and it is blindingly obvious that this infant died of a standard, very unfortunate gastrointestinal hemorrhage. Every single neonatal expert that looks at this case, whether they've looked at the case notes or not, comes to exactly the same conclusion. I have not encountered anyone who believes anything other than this is a naturally occurring gastrointestinal hemorrhage. Now, this is a thoroughly extraordinary exchange that occurs in relation to child E, and I don't know if I'm going to get through it in one video. It's 43 pages. I don't know how long it will take. I don't know how much I will need to interject, but I can always do it in 2 sittings and continue this after this first video. But I'll get through as much as I can in this video without making it of unwieldy length, and we'll just go from there. So we begin with the police officer questioning Lucy Letby on child E and stating that the first interview took place on the 4th of July. The interview began, as we can see from the summary, with introduction and caution. Yes. So in the beginning here, they just go over some basic details, but in the interest of being completist, I will go through this as well. So we're going to continue the same format as previously, Lucy, and we're going to go on to child E. I'm going to say child E rather than baby E, as they say, because they were expressed as child E officially. But for some reason, they're often referenced as baby E. A lot of that is because in the court case, the prosecution's trying to make it as emotive as possible. But I always refer to them as child A, child B, child C, etc. Okay, at 17:53 hours on the 29th of July 2015, child E was born to parents of children E and F. At 23:40 hours on the 3rd of August 2015, he suddenly deteriorated, and at 01:40 hours on the 4th of August 2015, child E was pronounced deceased. I believe you've had the chance to go through the notes. Yes. Other than those notes, do you remember your involvement with the care of child E? Yes. Okay, do you want to just tell us then, in your own words, what do you remember, please? So I remember the care of child E from memory. I believe he'd been started on insulin earlier in the day. He was on an insulin infusion, but otherwise doing well, and was starting to have enteral feeds. I remember after some of his feeds for me, I was getting large aspirates back from his nasogastric tube, and when I consulted the doctor, we omitted, I think, a feed. Then his abdomen became distended, and he was reviewed by the doctors, and some medications were started, and his abdomen continues to distend and become discoloured, and ended up needing respiratory support and began bleeding, and then he needed resuscitation. So if we just remind ourselves of what the panel said about this infant, you can see that Lucy has recounted several important details related to child E. There is something with disagreement on distension. I think that's essentially because of incorrect medical assessment at the time. But you can see that very good recall of the details again. And there's a good reason for that, and that's because this was a very traumatic incident for Lucy that she sobbed over in court. You can hear this recounted here. She sobbed as she recalled the traumatic death of a baby for which she was found guilty of murdering. The nurse wiped away tears with a tissue as she told the jury she had never seen a baby bleed in that way before when the 5-day-old boy died in front of his parents. I found child E's death very traumatic, Letby said, becoming emotional. Now I want you to bear in mind, she's been, obviously this is a long time ago now. This is 6-7 years ago by the time this is taking place. 7 years ago, in fact. She's already been interviewed. She's been through the whole thing. She's been through the aftermath. She's been arrested. She's been interviewed about this child multiple times. And still, when she was interviewed about in court, she broke down in tears. Now, that I think makes the assertion that she wasn't emotional even more unfair than it was already. But I just wanted to establish these facts before we go further into the interview. Is there anything else from your memory? And I remember caring for Child E once he'd passed away. Okay, so in terms of care given, when was the care given to Child E by you? So I took over on a night shift, and so it would have been from around 6 o'clock in the evening. Is that the 3rd into the 4th? So he died at 1:40 on the 4th, the morning of the 4th. So this was the 3rd, yeah. The 3rd into the 4th, yes. Sorry, go on. In terms of sort of handover, what did you understand to be his clinical position? From memory that he was stable and there was nothing sort of untoward other than the fact he was on insulin. Okay, in terms of caregiving, did anybody else have care for Child E overnight on that shift? Not that I recall, no. Okay, it was just myself. In respect to the care, Lucy, where was Child E? He was in nursery 1. Okay, do you recall any other babies in nursery 1 at that time on that shift? Yes, I think his brother was in there as well, Child F. Were there any other members of staff there? When? At any point? On that shift on the night you were caring for Child E. I know another nurse was there. I don't know at what point she was in the room. Belinda Simcock. Okay, was she caring for Child E's brother? I don't remember. So at what point do you remember Belinda being in there then? I think it was Belinda that was there when I asked for the help because he had blood back from his nasogastric tube. I think it was Belinda that I showed it to. Is that something you think or that you remember? I think. Right, you've obviously mentioned her name and you obviously think that's the time. What makes you think it was her at the relevant time when the blood was there? Because I remember showing the blood to somebody and I think it was Belinda. Okay, and what did Belinda say to that? That we discard that and not feed him and then get the doctors to review him. Okay, so you were his designated nurse, just to make that clear. Yes. Okay, so you then went on to say that he was doing well having feeds, and you said something feeds and I didn't quite catch it, the name of the type of feeds. I think he was starting feeds, I think so. Okay, and how was he during the feeds on that evening? I think from memory he had one feed that I gave him that was okay, and then on the next feed I was getting a large aspirate back from his nasogastric tube, as of course has been recounted by the panel. Okay, what about the sort of interventions? Did he have the up-the-nose tubes? No. Lucy Letby explained that Child E was attached to a Philips monitor. He had a nasogastric tube in place and was self-ventilating in air. Okay, so who puts the tube down? Nursing staff. Did you do that with Child E? Not that I recall, no. The feeding charts might show us that, mightn't they? Yes, I don't remember putting the tube in on Child E, so I think he would have had it already in. So in terms of him doing well, what do you consider as doing well? That his observations were stable, that he was handling appropriately. I think from memory that his blood sugar levels were stable. Any concerns at all for Child E at this point? No, not prior to that large aspirate, no. What about his colour? I don't recall there being a problem with his colour at that point. Okay, anything before the aspirate? So you then said there was a large aspirate. I think it was a bile aspirate. I don't know what that is. Bile is a product that's produced by the liver that we get from the bowel. Okay. So I assume they do know what bile is. I assume they were just playing dumb. But as you can see, I guess a reflection that we would have at this point is two obvious reflections. Does this strike you as someone who's not telling the truth, or who's trying to invent a story, who's trying to cover her tracks? No. And then secondly, remember in the Netflix documentary, they implied that Lucy Letby said no comment. And they implied that she said that on a regular basis. She's entitled to say no comment. That is not incriminating. But we know from the police interviews that they've released that there is very, very minimal. I mean, I've seen nothing where she won't answer a question. Now, it's possible that some of that is removed from these transcripts. I personally don't think that's likely because all the questions follow on naturally. That there's no indication of any gaps. But even if she did say no comment occasionally, look how compliant and cooperative and helpful she was. She's answering every single question. She's given detailed answers. She's given accurate answers. They knew damned well that it was completely unfair, that it was pure smear tactics to imply that she answered no comment. Of course, that's leaving aside the fact we know that she answered those no comment questions previously. But even across the interviews as a whole, there's no indication that she was evasive or didn't want to answer questions. In fact, she would have been better advised to answer no comment far more often than she did. Essentially, everything about the way that Lucy's participating in these interviews is indicative of the fact that she's trying to help the police, she's trying to tell the truth, and she thinks if she helps them out and if she tells the truth, she will be exonerated. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. So Lucy continues, and usually it's a sign they're not digesting their feeds or there's potentially an infection. Bile isn't something we want to be getting back from the stomach. What is that suggesting to you then, Lucy? That there's some sort of abdominal issue? Is it something you would escalate to a doctor, for example? So usually from my perspective as a Band 5, you would ask a senior member of nursing staff, so a Band 6 or the nurse in charge, and they would advise. Right, is that what she is? Yes. And what was the advice? To discard that and omit the feed. Okay, I think from memory. Okay. Are there any circumstances where you would need to keep the aspirate, the bile-type substances? You could keep it to show the doctors, and that's what we usually do. Right. So we discard it from the baby and that we don't return it. Oh. But we usually keep the syringe to show a member of staff. Did you do that in this case? I don't remember. You then said that his abdomen was distended. How? What kind of time difference is there here? I'm not sure from memory, but I think maybe an hour, something like that. I don't think it was long. Okay, had you gone away from child E and come back in the hour, or were you caring for him throughout that period? I don't recall if I had another baby that I was caring for at that point, but I don't remember being with child E the whole time. Usually for a baby that's self-ventilating, we wouldn't need to be, okay, at the cot side the whole time. Okay, so in terms of his abdomen being distended, can you describe that further for me? So I noticed that his abdomen became fuller and rounder, and that later on in the evening there was a discoloration area to part of his abdomen, like a purple discoloration, described as purpuric in some evidence used in court. That the panel's already responded to this, of course. Maybe it'd be a good time to just quickly have a look at what the panel said about this discoloration before we continue. So in the panel here, we can see patchy skin discolorations are caused by dilation and contraction of small blood vessels in the skin in response to hypoxia, which can occur in many conditions and are not diagnostic of air embolism. Non-specific localized patchy skin discolorations have not been reported in infants with venous air embolism, including IV air injection, and only Lee's sign and Liebermeister sign are diagnostic of air embolism. Now, you don't have to delve into scientific papers in order to find this out, because this is the Wikipedia page for cyanosis. Cyanosis is the change of tissue colour to a bluish-purple hue as a result of decrease in the amount of oxygen bound to the hemoglobin in the red blood cells of the capillary bed. And you see here in this medical document that hypoxia can cause cyanosis, as low oxygen levels in the blood can lead to a bluish discoloration of the skin and mucous membranes. Now, what we can essentially conclude from this is that the discoloration is completely irrelevant in this infant. In terms of, yes, it gives an indication of something, but the blood is what you would look at as a physician. You wouldn't be looking at like a purplish hue on the skin. Well, I wonder what happens with this infant. Well, there's evidence to lost between 25% and 35% of the blood, but maybe this discoloration of the skin is significant. That's just an indication that the infant is collapsing because the infant has lost blood. It's only in this balmy case, in which Dr. Evans has put absolute shite in the court case, in which they're now going to spend a long period of time discussing this discoloration, which is absolutely of no relevance. In terms of clinical signs, literally no relevance to this infant whatsoever. It's only because Dr. Evans has put this absolute total nonsense of air embolism in this case. Clearly air embolism has nothing to do with the collapse and death of this infant. Although, according to Sandy Bohin, that's what caused the death, and the blood was nothing to do with the death of this infant. So we begin this discussion about discoloration. And what did that discoloration indicate to you? What did that cause you concern with regards to baby E? It caused concern, yes. Why? Why is that a concern? Because that's not something that is normal for a baby to have. So in terms of how big the patch was and its location, and you know how long it was there for, what can you tell me about that? I think from memory it was towards the right-hand side by his umbilicus, but I can't remember the extent or the size at the moment. We don't see many babies that have abdominal problems and things like that. What, the distension or the discoloration? The discoloration. So I don't even really understand why they're asking that question. It doesn't even make any sense. You couldn't have a distension to the right-hand side, obviously. Okay, what was that a sign of to you? There's an ongoing abdomen problem. Okay, did anyone else witness that discoloration? I believe he was reviewed again by the doctors, yes. So I'm not really sure that Lucy's correct about this notion there's an ongoing abdominal problem. It's more an indication of what I've just discussed. How long after the distension did the discoloration appear? Again, I can't be specific on times. Okay, if you just talk generally, whether it was a few minutes or a few hours, can you clarify more than that? I would say minutes rather than hours, which is exactly what you would expect, of course. Okay, were you still with child E throughout these changes? I don't recall if I was there consistently or if I'd left at any point. I don't recall. I think from memory, he deteriorated and was desaturating and having apneas and needed some support with the neopuff. Okay, how long after that, how long after the discoloration was that requirement? Again, I'm not sure. Can you say minutes as opposed to hours? I would say minutes, yes. It's obviously going to be minutes because there's not going to be some discoloration and no one is going to do anything, even on this unit. Obviously, they're going to respond to something within a matter of minutes if there's indication of discoloration that shouldn't be there, because that is typically a sign of respiratory collapse. Okay, so what action did you take at that point? I think we got the doctors to review him again. Okay, think, or you know. Well, she just said think. You think. So when you say we, who's we? I think Belinda Simcott was with me. Was anyone else with you at the point of you realising that it required respiratory support? Not that I recall, no. Okay, how were you alerted to it? I don't remember. Lucy Letby, in summary, could not remember how she became aware that child E required respiratory support. She confirmed that he was connected to a monitor at the time. Okay, but you don't recall whether the monitor alerted you to the desaturation. Okay. So at that point, you think that you obviously responded, but Belinda was there, and that you did you say you alerted the doctors? I think so, yes. And who responded to that? Dave Harkness. Do you know where he was when he was requested? I'm not sure where, but he wasn't on the unit. He was, or he wasn't on the unit. Wasn't. Okay, what's the process that you go through to alert him? I'm not sure because I'm not sure if I was the one who called him or if he was somebody else. Right, and how long after you realised that this deterioration was going on did he arrive? I can't be specific, I don't know. Okay, then you stated there was bleeding. Tell me about that. So I was getting blood back from the nasogastric tube, and from memory I'm not sure at what point that came, that I first noticed that there was some blood coming from the nasogastric tube. Okay, in how long after you recognising his deterioration did you see the bleeding? I'm not sure if the bleeding came before that or after. So they're going to move on to talk about the bleeding now, as you can probably tell. I'll just ask you again at this point to reflect on the way that Lucy's answering these questions, the level of cooperation, the level of detail and accuracy. And yet we saw Danielle Stonier in this Netflix documentary saying that she believed the way Lucy was answering the questions was suspicious. So I don't know if she's an experienced police interviewer. One would hope so, seeing as she was put in to this situation. But she's extremely bad at reading people, it would appear. Although as she'd been essentially involved with the families for 2 years prior to interviewing, she already had a biased perspective. I mean, there's confirmation bias running through every single aspect of this investigation. It is quite staggering how inept it is, but there you go. I mean, that's behind us now. there's nothing that can be done about it. And they're going to move on now to talk about the bleeding at some length. Okay, in how long after you recognising his deterioration did you see the bleeding? I'm not sure if the bleeding came before that or after. While we're talking about bleeding then, can you describe the, what colour, what the colour of that was? I know it's a strange question to ask, but it was fresh blood. Okay, what was that suggesting to you then? That it's a fresh bleed, it's an active bleed, it's not old blood, it's new blood. So what could be going on with baby E for this to happen? That he's bleeding in his abdomen. Okay. Lucy Letby was then asked some questions about her notes that she had in front of her, presumably. This is the commentator saying yes. In quotes, and it's at tile 126 if anyone wants to refer to it, at 2200 a large vomit of fresh blood, 14 millilitres of fresh blood, aspirate obtained with nasogastric tube, Registrar Harkness attended. Yes? Okay. Was that the first time that you'd seen blood? I think so, yes. I'd have to check the actual feeding chart because that's where I would document the aspirates. The office then read the relevant note in full or that nursing note in full. Okay, had you seen any blood on child E prior to that large vomit of fresh blood? No, not from my notes and my charts, no. But if you had, would you have put it in the notes? Yes. Okay, when you saw that blood, was anyone there at that time with you? I think I showed it to Belinda. I'm not sure if she was there when I actually obtained it. Lucy Letby couldn't remember whether Belinda Simcott was in the room with her when she first saw blood. What about any of the family? I don't recall. I know Mum visited at some point, but I'm not sure at which point the mum was there. I know she was sat with him for a period of time. Okay, I presume that if she had been there, she would have seen the blood herself then, would she? Yes. Okay, do you remember whether or not the family saw blood? I don't remember that, no. Do you remember any conversation that you had with the family regarding the blood at all? Not from memory, no. I'd have to check my notes. What about updating the family regarding the blood? I believe Mum was updated, yes. Who updated the family? I think myself and Registrar Harkness. Do you remember when that happened then? I think it was after he'd been reviewed and we had started the medications. So again, do you see anything suspicious about this? Do you see Lucy lying in any way, or being evasive in any way, or doing anything other than answering the questions with an enormous amount of detail, and I would say a quite significant degree of fluency? Okay, so Registrar Harkness attended. What was his view of the blood? What was his feeling that was going on? I think he wanted us to start with the metronidazole, I think that might be pronounced, and ranitidine, which is used to treat bowel conditions. So I just mentioned briefly at this point, I don't know anything about the first of those two medications, but this second one, ranitidine, has been banned in this country. It's banned across the EU, I believe, and it's known that it can contribute to conditions such as bleeding. We don't know if that was a factor, but it can be significant. Regardless of that, it wouldn't. I don't think it would have caused. I'm on shaky ground to give an opinion on this. If there's any medics, doctors, nurses, etc. in the comments, please let me know your opinion. But it seems unlikely that ranitidine would have been the sole cause of a bleed on this scale. But it could have been a contributing factor. I think I'm right in saying that, but if anyone has a different view who knows better than me, please let me know. Did he have a view of what the condition was for child E? I think there was mention of it being necrotizing enterocolitis, and I think he ordered an abdominal x-ray as well. Was there any issues with the nasogastric tube at all? Was it correctly fitted? I don't recall there being any issues with it. In the correct position, was it? Without an x-ray, the only way I would know is checking that when we document here the length that it's been inserted, that you would check, okay, prior to aspirate, and if the aspirate is an acidic aspirate, then it indicates that it's in the stomach. So in relation to 14 millilitres of fresh blood, which you put, is that a large quantity? Yes. Okay, but that was the first quantity that you measured with your treatment of child E that evening, of blood. I've had the bile aspirate prior to that. Yes, but that was not blood. No. You described that bile aspirate as mucky. What did you mean by that? It's mucky, it's sort of dark, it's not pure bile, so bile is bright green, where mucky is sort of a bit darker. And that was prior to the 9 o'clock feed that you put in your notes, prior to the 9 o'clock feed, yeah? Yes, and that's the feed that I omitted. Then, in summary, Lucy Letby was able to confirm that she had not fitted child E's feeding tube. He had been due a feed at 2100 hours, but she had found the mucky aspirate before that, and it had been omitted as a result. She took her times from the clock on the nursery wall. So before we go any further, they're making all these notes and they've got all these responses. And we see Dr. Evans changing his reports multiple times. I've featured this in previous videos. We don't know whether this information was shared with him or not. But would anyone like to have a bet on whether it was shared with him or not? Would there be any at any time if you'd found blood on child E that you wouldn't have told a doctor? No. No, I take it you know the sign of fresh blood being vomited. Was that a sign that there was something serious going on? Yes, I have not seen a baby vomit like that. I have not seen a baby have blood coming back like that before. Okay, would that be something that you would tell the family, or is it something that you've dismissed? Were you overly concerned at that point? I was concerned in that it was something that I hadn't seen before, but I don't recall the registrar being overly concerned. Right, okay. So it's not something that you would concern the parents with necessarily. I think it's something we would tell the parents, probably. I'm not sure without looking at my notes, in terms of them, what they were told. Okay, if you had told the parents about that, would that have been in your notes? Would you have put that in your notes? Yes. You then go on to say the abdomen was soft and non-distended. So remember, that is mentioned in the panel's verdict on this infant, the fact that the abdomen is soft and non-distended. So this is another aspect of this infant that Lucy has recorded correctly. So when I said earlier there was disagreement on the distension, that may not actually be the case. So I could have been wrong about that, actually. The SHO informed and to omit feed. Who checked the abdomen? Myself. Right. So you were happy at that point and you were not overly concerned? No. So I'm happy the abdomen was soft and non-distended, and then got the SHO to review him. So SHO is just it's an acronym for Senior House Officer. It just means registrar, essentially. And these are effectively junior doctors on the unit. Okay, and this would have been after 9 o'clock. Am I right in saying that? Yes. Okay, and the SHO, who was the SHO? I don't remember. Right. Did they actually attend, or did they just give you advice regarding that? You've obviously got SHO informed to omit feed. I don't remember. I don't remember if they physically came or whether there was a telephone conversation. Right. But that doesn't remind you at all of who actually saw him or reviewed him over the phone. No. Okay, so after whoever it was that came, if they did come and prescribe this to help, child E's tummy settled because of the mucky. Yes. Is that right? Yes. And then you've then co-signed it. Did you administer that as his designated nurse? I don't recall. So, was child E showing any sort of signs or symptoms after the bile that was aspirated? Not that I remember, no. No. So there was no real change in his handling or anything? No. And Lucy Letby was then asked about the distinction between the vomit and the aspirate. So a large vomit is a large amount that's come out of the mouth. In addition to the 14 millilitres of fresh blood aspirate, yes. Did he vomit prior to the aspirate? I'm not sure. If you know how you've written it here, one and then the other. Oh, sorry, yes, he's vomited, and then I've got blood back from his tube. Okay, but are we clear that it didn't occur before 10 o'clock, though? You've got at 10 o'clock hours, large vomit, there is no blood loss. No. Prior to that, no. This was the first time, yes. Then the officer returned to the notes. Okay, and then a further 13 millilitres of blood obtained by 2300 hours. Where was this obtained from? The nasogastric tube. So at this point, there's a total of 27 millilitres of fresh blood in the period of an hour. Is that right, together with the vomit of blood? Right, okay. So what was going through your mind at that time when another 13 millilitres of blood were taken? I was quite concerned. Lucy Letby could not remember how soon after this further quantity of blood that child E deteriorated again. She thought Dr. Harkness was there at the time. She was asked, around this time, just prior to obviously his desaturation, what were your activities? What, for child E, generally? I don't remember. Okay, because of the previous blood, were you around child E all the time? I don't remember. Okay. You then go on to say, oxygen given by a neopuff, toes becoming white and baby E cool to touch. Like you say, Registrar Harkness is present throughout, and then continues with the note. Child E began to decline. At 23:40 hours, he became bradycardic. A purple band of discoloration over the abdomen, perfusion poor, and a CRT in 3 seconds. This purple band, can you describe that to us? As I said before, I don't remember it specifically, but I think it was a purplish area around his umbilical area. Okay, was that the same one that you'd previously described? Yes. Okay, because you obviously describe it as a band. Why? What do you mean by a band? A band, it was sort of a line, horizontal or vertical. I would read band as horizontal from memory. And do you remember the width of that at all? No. And had you seen anything like that before? No, I don't think so. The officers read the notes of Child E's unsuccessful resuscitation, and she was asked, do you remember what your role was in the resuscitation? I think I carried out chest compressions at one point because I remember I was pressing down more blood came out of his mouth. So how were you feeling, Lucy, at that time? It wasn't nice to see. Do you remember what time the mother was present? Only from what I've written there, that was present at the start of the shift and then visiting again at 10 o'clock. Okay, do you remember when she left then? After the 10 o'clock visit, when... So I'm just going to stop at this point. Obviously, we're seeing the same themes repeated. This is a pretty forensic investigation of this infant, with Lucy giving very accurate representation of what occurred that's extremely consistent with the panel's opinion. Obviously, I don't know if it's apparent yet, but the police are going to focus on this 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock dichotomy. Now, it's really quite clear as we continue with this interview that Lucy's version of events is correct. I've made this clear in previous videos, and in court, as we discussed recently in the video that I made on Child E, the prosecution tried to make it into a binary choice between you either believe Lucy Letby or you believe the parents. If you believe the parents, then Lucy Letby murdered the infant. Of course, that is utterly ridiculous, but it's also clear that Lucy Letby's version of events is the only one that makes sense, and that the parents were essentially mistaken about what they stated. Okay, do you remember when she left then, after the 10 o'clock visit when, this is the note, Mummy was present at start of shift attending to cares, visited again approximately 10 o'clock, so she's obviously there. What time would you have come on shift in the morning, in the evening? 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock, do you remember what time she left before she returned? No. No, okay, well, she did leave and she came back. You've put at 10 o'clock. Yes. Did anything happen to Child E before she returned at 10 o'clock? I think in your notes that you got, when I look back, yeah, you've got this. We had the mucky aspirate at 9 o'clock. Yeah, but no bleed at all before she returned at 10 o'clock. I think, well, there was at 10 o'clock, so, okay, not before 10 o'clock. We've got, she returned at 2200 hours, and I think it was 2200 hours when she had the large vomit, a large vomit of fresh blood, yeah. So prior to Mum coming at 10 o'clock, no. No, do you remember how that conversation with Mum went regarding that bleed? I remember her being concerned. Okay, do you remember what she said to you? Just that she would like us to contact her if there was any further decline or any update for her. She was resting upstairs at the time. Okay, did she see the vomit as well? Because obviously the first one is at 2200 hours, large vomit of fresh blood, and obviously aspirate obtained from the nasogastric tube. I would assume that she was there then. During the vomit and the aspirate, because it just, on this communication, it just says that she was aware that we'd obtained blood from his nasogastric tube, not with reference to the vomit. No, so I'm not sure when he vomited then. I don't think he vomited prior to her coming. So I must say as well that obviously if an infant vomits, that's not a good thing. But this infant died due to massive blood loss due to a gastrointestinal hemorrhage. I'm not sure that the vomiting is particularly significant. But you're going to understand something important about Child E as we continue with this transcript. So you think he vomited after her coming? Because I think I probably would have explained that we'd had a vomit and blood from his nasogastric tube if he'd vomited. Okay, so what does that make you think about the first lot of notes then, where it's at 22, large vomit of fresh blood, and then the 40 millilitres fresh blood aspirate obtained, and that's on the first page though, at 2200, that he's had a large vomit at 2200. Yes, but obviously you're saying that mum returned at 2200. I've said approximately, so I don't write. I've written approximately 2200. Okay, so I'm not sure. But obviously this must be post-vomit, because that's when you got the blood from the nasogastric tube, because that's what you told her. Yes. I'm right in saying this, and then I'm a bit confused, yeah. Then there's some talking between the officers. I suppose the question is, how did she become aware? Is it something you've told her, or something she's witnessed? About the blood from his nasogastric tube? I would read from this that I've told her because I've told her that we're starting medications to treat it. Okay. So she visually saw it. So he must have vomited before then, mustn't he? I would assume so, yes. So would there be any reason why you wouldn't tell Mum over the vomit of blood? No, not that I remember. What's the conversation that you had with her, can you recall? I'm not sure if it was myself that told her or somebody else, and I'm writing that she's been told because I was there when somebody else told her. I'm not sure. Right, okay. And then just reading this, I put that Mum was updated by Registrar Harkness. Yeah, okay. So I think it was a joint discussion between myself and Registrar Harkness to update Mum. So just pause at this moment to reflect on this. So essentially, the police have decided we're just going to completely believe the account of the parents, just as we completely believe the account of the consultants, because it suits us, it suits our narrative, our eyes have lit up, and we've decided, wow, this is going to be a massive case in our little police station, when there's no basis to do so. It's clear that Lucy's notes are very accurate for this infant, whereas it's much more likely that the mother's recollection is going to be inaccurate. And as we saw in the Ben Myers closing statement with regards to this infant, the amount of blood around the mouth, as recounted by the mother, was clearly incorrect. And actually, the timings related to the mother's account don't make any sense. Essentially, they're fundamentally impossible. Not that any of this really matters, because this is a naturally occurring gastrointestinal hemorrhage. How were you feeling after Child E's death? It was upsetting. Whose decision was it for you to bathe Child E? The parents asked me to. Did you create a memory box for Child E at all? Yes. On the instigation of who? What do you mean, who told me to? Yeah. Did you? Was that something you... It's just something that we do for babies. I don't think anybody told me to do it. Right, so is it something you would always do? Is it something the family would say, yeah, can you do that for me? No, we do it. Okay, as a matter of course. Yes. And again, did you stay in touch with the family at all following Child E's death? Only for the time that baby F remained on the unit, not afterwards, no. Okay, and obviously another stressful day for you. How did you deal with it personally? I don't recall specifically. I know I found it very helpful to have bathed him and had some time with him and dressing him. I found that quite a privilege that Mum and Dad wanted me to do that for them. Do you have any opinion as an experienced neonatal nurse as to what happened to Child E? No, I'm not medically trained and I don't know exactly what happened to him, but I feel there was obviously some sort of bleed from his abdomen. Right, okay. And obviously I did feel that the registrar wasn't overly concerned, and I don't know, I was a little bit concerned, but I felt reassured that he wasn't. So essentially, of course, again, Lucy's completely correct about this. There very obviously was a gastrointestinal bleed. It should be blindingly obvious that that was the reason the infant died. Now, we're going to come on to Dr. Evans a bit later, so I won't say anything more at this point in time. We'll just continue with the transcript. Okay, and following deterioration, did you raise your concerns with anybody? I think I discussed it with Belinda. Oh, right, and what was the outcome of that? I'm not sure. Okay, and what were the concerns that you expressed at that time to Belinda? I think I spoke to her about that I'd not seen a baby bleed in that way before, and her being more experienced, had she seen it, and what would potentially cause that, and was it something that maybe the registrar could have acted on differently, or something that we could have done differently? Right, and do you know what her answer was? No, I don't remember. The second interview then took place on the 11th of June 2019. So at the end of the first interview, there's just a lot of questions about blood, essentially. And they mention this discoloration that is, in terms of the clinical outcome of the infant, is completely irrelevant, but that is just an indicator that the child was losing blood and collapsing just due to lack of oxygenation, essentially, as discussed earlier in the video. So I'm not going to go through the second interview in its entirety. I'm just going to go through some highlights or lowlights, as you may describe them. So it begins with this question about Dr. Chris Wood was the duty SHO on this day from 8:30 in the evening. He does not recall speaking to yourself as indicated in your notes. Do you recall if it was Chris Wood, Lucy? I don't recall who it was, no. If he was the duty SHO on from 8:30 in the evening, is it likely it would have been him who you spoke to? Yeah, him or his registrar, yeah. So what I want you to note about this is that when Lucy can't recall something, that is viewed as suspicious. But when Dr. Chris Wood can't recall something, they automatically assume that this means that Lucy's account of things is incorrect. I just want that to be noted. Then they move on to this. Okay, but in your notes it says SHO informed, right? That's what okay, I don't recall specifically speaking to an SHO, so I can't confirm that it was him or not him. He would have been the only one. There's only one SHO on duty. Yeah. If it was the registrar that you informed Lucy, would you have written registrar in your notes and not SHO? Yes, unless I have just done it as an oversight. Because obviously using the word informed would suggest that you wrote this after you had spoken to them. So this is some brilliant line of inquiry from Cheshire Police. But essentially, as I say, they're punishing Lucy here because she can't absolutely recall absolutely everything about this case. Whereas when they interviewed Dr. Chris Wood and he said, they said to him, do you remember this conversation with Lucy Letby? And he said, no, I can't recall that. They didn't penalise him or assume that, okay, well, his memory is obviously worse than Lucy's, so therefore we'll assume that it did happen. They assumed that, because he can't recall it, that must mean that it's untrue. And we're going to come back to discuss this thematically as we continue. Tell me about the blood around baby E's mouth at this time. I can't remember specifically what time I saw the blood or didn't see blood. I don't remember it. Okay, so from your notes in your previous interview, you commented that child E had a large vomit of fresh blood at 10 o'clock on the 3rd of August. I'll give you a copy. If you just have a look at your notes there, Lucy, yes. Tell me what you remember of her coming to the neonatal ward then. I know she came down, this is the parents. I think she sat with child E for a bit, and I think at some point she was updated by a registrar, maybe about child E, I don't remember. Okay, just confirm the time that you put down there, Lucy, for us, that's happened. 2200 hours. So we know that the police are going to make a big deal out of this. This was in the prosecution case. This is supposed to be significant. She says there that you told her it would just be his feeding tube irritating his throat. Explain to me what made you believe it was his feeding tube. I don't know why I would say it was the feeding tube irritating his throat. That's not a normal reason for a baby to have blood in its mouth. I don't know why I would have said that. So I just wanted to highlight this as something that Lucy really should not have said. Basically, I know why she said this. She was trying to reassure the parents. So obviously she's in a very stressful situation. She's traumatised, etc., and she can't remember everything. So she just said, I can't recall why I said this. Now, what I'd particularly like to mention here is, what the hell was the solicitor doing? Why isn't the solicitor stepping in? Why is the solicitor just sitting there? We've not seen a single word from the solicitor in any of these interviews, hardly. And in these ones for Child E, literally nothing. He's just letting his client just sit there and answer questions for hour after hour after hour, while the police erect this ridiculous narrative. And he's not at any stage saying, don't speak. You know, it's unbelievable. What's he even getting paid for? It might as well just be anyone sat there. They might as well just got someone in on the minimum wage, or even someone who's doing voluntary work, because they could have just sat there doing nothing. So I've documented she was updated by Registrar Harkness and contained Child E, so I'm assuming that's around the time at 10 o'clock when she visited. She was referring to offering containment holding. You're clear with the time there, Lucy, aren't you? I've documented 2200 hours, 10 o'clock, yeah. Okay, mother of babies E&F says that you told her it was the feeding tube irritating his throat. Why did you tell her to go back upstairs if it was just an irritation? I don't think I told her definitively she needed to go and leave the unit. We just often advise parents at night to go and get some rest. So you notice how completely innocuous things are being viewed as suspicious by the police. Again, I'll come back to this thematically in a second. Okay, so I think it was said in that intent rather than saying she had to leave. Okay, at 9 o'clock. No, I've documented it at 10 o'clock. It was explained to Lucy Letby that the mother of child E and F had obtained her mobile telephone records and insisted her visit was 9 p.m. What time have you got that that the mother had attended? Approximately 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock. In fact, it's in 24 hours, so it says 2000 and then 2200. Yes. Okay, and that she was here, present at the start of the shift, attending to cares. So one thing I'll just mention here is, this information is coming from the parents. This is not even police information that they obtain. This is coming from the parents of the infant. Is there any reason, Lucy, that you've documented in your notes it could be incorrect? No. She did mum come down again at 10 o'clock. I put that she visited at the start of the shift, attending to cares. I haven't put when she left. So we know already that this is all completely bogus, and it's already been proven that the mother's version of events is completely impossible for several reasons. Documented by John Sweeney. I've put this in my book. I've discussed this on the channel previously. I'm not going to go over it again. We know the prosecution case is impossible. And it doesn't make any sense anyway, because Lucy Letby would have had to have deliberately harmed this infant, which I'll return to again at the end of the video, and then stood around for an hour doing nothing. And no one would have noticed. That is preposterous. It doesn't make any sense. So this continues. Okay, I'll ask the question again. Does that account differ from what is documented in your notes? Yeah. So I haven't written about any blood coming from Child E's mouth in the notes. Okay. I haven't documented it on his chart either until 2100 hours. Can you explain that to me? I've made an error. I've put approximately 10 o'clock, and it must have been before that. Would you look at that as a serious situation? It depends how much has come out. I don't know if this is a mucousy amount of blood that would look a lot that isn't a large amount. I don't recall. So again, we've established in a previous video, the parent's account of the amount of blood around the mouth of the infant is not consistent with it being a large amount of blood. This is probably why it wasn't noted at the time. There was probably a very small amount of blood that looked like it could have accidentally been wiped on the infant, which is why it hasn't been noted, because this isn't of any medical significance. So essentially there are two items of evidence that the police are looking at here. The record about the timing is wrong, and the amount of blood around the mouth is also wrong. Let's continue. Okay, from the evidence that we have read out to you, Lucy, you were at Child E's cot side when his mum walked in when he had blood around his mouth. Do you agree with that? So this is what is being used to convict her when this infant has died of a very obvious gastrointestinal hemorrhage. From the mother's recollection, yes. Do you agree, having spent time looking at them, that the time on your notes is incorrect? Yes, I've written an approximation of 2200 hours. So basically, this is similar to the insulin cases, where Lucy's been giving false information, and then she's being forced to concede that, and then they're treating this as a kind of confession. But there's nothing to support what the mother of babies, E and F, is saying about the event at 9 o'clock. No. At 9 o'clock, I've documented that there was 16 millilitres mucky aspirate, not blood. There's a bit of a difference, though, isn't there, Lucy, between a mucky aspirate and blood around the mouth? Yes, yes. And that's the mucky aspirate, Lucy, that you have documented in your notes that SHO informed you. You see, I don't remember contacting whether it was done by a telephone call, in which case it wouldn't have been documented. That he told me over the phone to omit the feed, but he says he doesn't recall speaking to you yourself. So, just because he doesn't recall it, doesn't mean that it didn't happen. But of course, the police, because they've been told that by a doctor, they've automatically assumed that the doctor is correct, as I discussed earlier. Now, I've mentioned this previously, that I believe that there's this psychological phenomenon that could potentially occur and could potentially exist in police, whereby they are surrounded by crime and criminals so much, and most of these are legitimately crimes, and most of the people that they arrest are legitimately criminals, or many of them are, and they legitimately convict people. Even though there are a lot of miscarriages of justice, it's still a relatively small percentage of the number of people that go to prison and the number of people that go to court. So they develop, as is described here in this classic study from 2003, a kind of cynicism about the world, and that tends to inform their perspective. And it takes an intelligent person like Dr. Steve Watts to be able to stick to the policy and procedure, stick to the approach, remain objective, and follow natural lines of inquiry. This lot have got no chance. And it's clear that this has very much informed the way that they've approached this investigation and approached the interview of Lucy Letby, because they are thinking, why is she lying? Why is this incorrect? Why can't she remember this? And you've seen in Netflix these ridiculous, trivial, meaningless things that are advanced as being suspicious, and I believe that is because of the phenomenon that's being described here in this academic study. So interview 2 continues here. So you can see in this section that the police are fixated on the blood around the mouth as if there's something significant about that, as if that's evidence that Lucy Letby has caused this bleed. Now, there's something significant about that as well that I'm going to discuss at the end of the video, but we'll see in a second that Lucy's had all this discussion with them and she doesn't even really understand what they're getting at, because the idea that she caused the bleed is so ridiculous to her. I mean, she probably couldn't even imagine a mechanism by which she could have done this, because of course she didn't do it. And of course Dr. Evans changed the mechanism after he realised it couldn't be with a nasogastric tube. So she probably couldn't even imagine that this could have been a human-induced bleed, and indeed there is no evidence for that whatsoever. So you're going to see in a second that Lucy is actually... she probably doesn't even understand why they're discussing all this stuff. She's just trying to help, give accurate answers and give a reliable account and be as cooperative as possible. And then it eventually dawns on her that they're accusing her of causing this bleeding. Can you explain to me, Lucy, why the bleed, which the mother of child E and F witness, was ignored? As I say, I don't specifically remember that bleed, and I think if it had been anything of the volume she is stating, then it would have been escalated. I'm sure that's absolutely true. I wouldn't have just left him bleeding. I'm sure that's absolutely true. I can imagine that any amount of blood, however small, would be very concerning to a parent. Yeah. Whether that's a tiny amount or what they view as being a lot. Is this because you intentionally caused harm to child E. Lucy? No. Have I caused this bleed? Yes. No. Is it that mother of babies E and F has walked in whilst you're attacking him? No. Is that what you told the mother of babies E and F to go back upstairs, Lucy? I don't recall definitively telling them to go upstairs. I believe my advice was to go upstairs and get some rest, and we will contact you if there are any changes. Of course, completely normal, not just on a neonatal unit, happens all the time in accident emergency, happens when people are kept in overnight. Perfectly normal. And then there's Lucy Letby is informed here that Dr. Manarida's view was that the cause of death was unascertained. Okay? So this is Dr. Manarides, who said definitively in court, having had his mind changed by seeing the reports of Dr. Evans, that child C, and other infants indeed in the court case, that the cause of death was definitively, explicitly, the splinting of the diaphragm. Dr. Evans, of course, has now disowned this theory, which Dr. Philip Hammond has described as embarrassing for Dr. Manarides. But I don't feel a great deal of sympathy for Dr. Manarides, because he was perfectly happy to speak explicitly in court, and I might note that he was being paid at that time, and since then he's gone rather quiet. So if you were to approach him now and say, will you discuss this matter, Dr. Manarides, all of a sudden he'd be rather reticent to say anything, as we've seen when people have approached him. But at the time, he was only too happy to go into the court case and say, Lucy Letby has definitely splintered the diaphragm of this child, even though neonatologists have described this as completely laughable. So when he says the cause of death is unascertained, that may be a reasonable view for a pathologist. It may be. It's possible that he should have been able to ascertain the cause of death, but it may be that it requires a specialised neonatologist to be able to ascertain this. But it's very clear that this infant died due to a gastrointestinal hemorrhage, and I feel that if Dr. Manarides had been able to carefully examine the notes, he should have been able to ascertain this himself. But whether he'll ever actually respond to anything until he's dragged into the Court of Appeal remains to be seen. Anyway, Lucy says in response to this, no, I believe at the time the consultant felt it was necrotizing enterocolitis that he had died from. This can be associated with bleeding, and this was mentioned in relation to this infant. I've spoken to neonatologists, and they don't believe it was necrotizing enterocolitis. But I've still discussed this in my book because there are certainly more signs of NEC, as it's described in an abbreviation. There are more signs of NEC than anything that Dr. Evans said. That's for sure. What are your thoughts on that? Well, that's what the consultant and doctors at the time felt that it was. Babies with necrotizing enterocolitis do get discoloration of the bowel. They can bleed as a result. And so that's the end of interview 2. So you can see what's occurred there, and I'm finally going to read out the entirety of interview 3 in this video. So it begins here. Is there a reason why the mother of child E and child F couldn't visit child E when she was being cleaned, Lucy? No. We might advise the parent not to be there, but would never ask, shut the door and say they can't come through. No. So if a parent wanted to be there at that time, you would allow that. I would personally, yeah. I don't see why the others wouldn't either. Dr. Hartness, he's provided a statement. He states that at 2200 hours, he was asked by you to review baby E. Do you remember showing an aspirate to Dr. Hartness around that time? I remember the aspirate, yes, yeah. So this is one of the critical reasons why the entire prosecution case doesn't make any sense. Was the aspirate that you showed to Dr. Hartness from child E, Lucy? Yes. Tell me about the photograph you took of child F once child E had passed away. Do you remember? If I took any photographs of child F, yes. I don't recall. I think I did separate photos, but they didn't want photos of them both together. So they're going to go on to some more ridiculous stuff, but again, this is redolent of what I mentioned to you about them seeing everything as suspicious because of this, what the study describes as inbuilt cynicism, I would see as the consequence of being around crime all the time. So do you remember taking a photograph of child F with a teddy bear? I don't remember specific photographs, no. I know that I did. I think I did take some photographs of child E. The officers then turned to telecommunications. At 21:06 hours on the 4th, you've messaged Nurse A and said, he was IUGR and REDF plus Prem and Query Downs, so I guess he was very high risk. It was just awful because he was bleeding from everywhere during resus. Got him back, but gas incompatible. Parents completely distraught. I feel numb. Do you remember that conversation? Yeah. Was that accurate what I've just gone through there, Lucy, from what you recall? Yes. Was he bleeding from everywhere? Yeah. Where exactly was he bleeding from, can you remember? His nasogastric tube, his mouth, and I think he passed some rectally as well. Is that description that you said in your message reflected anywhere in the clinical or nursing notes that you can recall? I'm not sure. So this isn't relevant. It's not disputed that this infant bled to death, except by Dr. Bohin, who thinks that the infant didn't bleed to death and that death was caused by an air embolism. But for any kind of sane person, or how he could possibly claim that the bleeding wasn't relevant, I have no idea. But certainly for every single other person with qualifications that has looked at this case, they have concluded that the blood is critical, and it must be critical. Of course it's critical. So the fact that it's not in the clinical or nursing notes, everyone knows that there's a bleed. Everyone knows that blood is coming out all over the place. People that are trying to save the infant know that. It was noted at the time. It was noted in the verdict of the pathologist. It was noted when these infants were examined in the post-mortem. It's now been cited by the expert panel. There's 25% to 35% blood loss in this infant. The fact that it's not in the clinical notes is completely irrelevant. And the idea that you could cause 35% blood loss by, thrusting a nasogastric tube down the throat of the infant. Not a nasogastric tube, an indeterminate tool, although I can't say what the tool was. Is rubbish. Is total rubbish. Anyway, let's continue. But why was he high risk, Lucy? Because he was a premature twin with other risk factors. Why are you asking? This is just a fact. Of course he's high risk. It's known that he's high risk. But of course, at this point, all they're trying to do is build their case. That they're trying to get a confession out of her. These aren't even legitimate questions at this point. Again, a solicitor should be stepping in. What does gas incompatible mean? That he has had a blood gas, but it's not really compatible. There's not a lot we can do to reverse it, which means ultimately he will pass away. At 2009 hours on the 4th, you've had a message conversation with Jen and said he had massive hemorrhage, could have happened to any baby. Do you recall that message? No. Of course, she's absolutely correct. Was that right, that it could have happened to any baby? Yeah, I think any baby could have a hemorrhage, yeah. A massive hemorrhage in the way you've described it in that previous text? I would think so. You know, I'm not a doctor, but you went on to say that it was an abdominal bleed. How do you know that, Lucy? Because we were getting blood back from the nasogastric tube, and I think he passed blood rectally, which would indicate that it was an abdominal issue. Okay, and that was the conclusion of that part of that interview. So again, everything that Lucy said there medically is completely correct. Now, that's the culmination of the interview. Now, I'm just going to reflect on two things that are really important. So I've written here, child E was supposedly murdered by a combination of throat trauma and deliberate causation of an air embolism. Lucy Letby was never asked about either of these things in her police interviews. In the case of the air embolism, this is possibly because Dr. Evans hadn't decided to incorporate that into his so-called diagnosis at this point. It can also be because air is very obviously irrelevant to the clinical picture of this infant unless your surname is Bohin. With regard to the throat trauma accusations, the reason that Lucy was never asked about this is because Dr. Evans only came up with it 1 month before the court case began, which of course was in 2022, whereas the last interview took place in 2020. Prior to that, he wrote in a previous report that he was at a loss to explain the bleeding. So there may have been some sort of dialogue at some stage in which the police sort of said, well, we're not really going to go into court with this stuff about there being blood around the mouth and a couple of timings that may or may not be correct. As it turns out, they're not correct. The prosecution case is not correct. That's all we've got. And at this point, 1 month before the court case, it is at this point that Dr. Evans suddenly decided, oh, what could have happened is Lucy Letby could have put something down the throat of the infant, for which there is absolutely no supporting evidence whatsoever. And also, Dr. Evans said he was at a loss to explain the blood loss. Two reasons for this. Firstly, he never did anything other than look for malfeasance, that's very clear. And secondly, he couldn't come up with something like this. What's on the screen now? This is the guy who said, oh, babies are basically really simple. You just ventilate them and respirate them, and then they get better. I mean, I'm paraphrasing very slightly, but that's basically what he said. He couldn't understand all this stuff. There's absolutely no chance. That's why when you see him speaking in the court case, it's all such complete rubbish. It's all so simplistic. And then whenever he's questioned, he sounds like such an idiot. Because he's way, way, way out of the loop. He probably wasn't that great in the first place. It's hard to say. Maybe he was a good doctor when he works as a paediatrician. It's very hard to say. I know some people have told me he wasn't really strongly involved with surgery. But I can't really comment on that. All I can say is that he's way, way out of the loop. He's been an expert witness for a long time. We know what he does as an expert witness. We know how many cases there are, even if the small number that are public, where there are question marks about what he's done. We know how definitive he is about things. So there's no, and then this is highly complex information that's being brought forward here. There's just no way, with the best will in the world, that he would be able to put this together. So this is an extraordinary case, Child E, in which there's a very obvious gastrointestinal hemorrhage. The police interviews are focused on discoloration, bleeding around the mouth, timings, none of which have any relevance whatsoever, and they've never actually asked Lucy Letby any questions about the allegations that are in court, that she faces in court. When she faced those in court, that was the first time she'd ever heard about it. I mean, it must be, because it was only a month before the trial that Dr. Evans came up with it, and I don't know to what extent she'd be updated in prison, but I'm guessing not very much. So she probably didn't even know this infant would be in the court case. And obviously, all the way through the interview, she's sitting there thinking, why are they going on about the blood? Well, I'll just try and answer the questions. And then it probably never even dawned on her that they were thinking she caused this blood, because she probably couldn't even envisage a method by which that would be possible. So this is an absolutely extraordinary, ridiculous case. The last thing I must mention again is that every neonatologist and every neonatal expert says that this is a gastrointestinal hemorrhage, which it very obviously is. What was put in court for this case is bullshit. What Lucy Letby was asked about this case is bullshit. And ironically, even the bullshit they used in court, they never even asked her about it because they couldn't, because Dr. Evans hadn't come up with it at that time. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. This is the culmination of the video now. I'm very appreciative for the support that I receive, and I always enjoy reading your comments. I'm sorry that I can't answer as many as I used to, but when I've sorted out everything with my book, I may be able to be more active again. It's literally just trying to balance everything. It's so difficult, given that I get hundreds and hundreds of notifications every day now, not just from YouTube, but from Twitter and other platforms, emails. There's constant stuff going on in the background. There's campaigning going on. I have to answer important correspondence. There's all kinds of stuff going on. Then I'm doing my book. Then I'm doing YouTube. So I've had to reduce the amount of time I spend interacting with you, which I regret because I enjoy it and it's really valuable to me. But your comments are always read and they're really useful. So as always, I'll look forward to reading them and I'll try to interact as much as I can. That will increase in the future, and I couldn't be more grateful for the support that I've received. With that being said, please do leave your comments and I'll look forward to reading them.